welcome to Mackinsey Live. I'm Lucia Rahili, and I'm back this week to moderate today's discussion. The COVID-19 recovery will be digital, and specifically what businesses can do over the next 90 days to accelerate their digital capabilities and position themselves competitively through and beyond the current crisis. We hope you find our conversation useful, and of course, most important, that all of you continue to be well as infection rates wax and wane across the globe. As we begin, a quick nod to yesterday's New York Times headline that CEOs are becoming increasingly cautious about the potential for a straightforward economic recovery as virus cases surge to new highs in some U.S. states and as flare-ups emerge in regions worldwide. Nevertheless, we also saw in the U.S. headlines the stock market once again claw its way into positive territory for 2020, largely driven by a rally in tech stocks. Whatever the rationality of the markets, there is no question that digital capabilities and the technological infrastructure to enable them have played a decisive role in organizations' ability to navigate the initial phases of the COVID-19 crisis successfully. And as the crisis lingers on and the confounding and precarious interval of uncertainty continues, the organizations that act quickly to advance their digital agenda will be best positioned not only to survive this crisis, but to thrive once it finally abates. Joining me today are two senior partners, Eric Lamar, leader of Mackinsey Digital in North America, and Kate Snage, leader of Mackinsey Digital globally. Eric and Kate are going to talk today about some of the lightning-fast changes we've seen since the beginning of this pandemic and what businesses can do very practically in the next 90 days to speed up their own migration to digital and to reset in this volatile and dynamic context successfully. Eric, Kate, thanks for joining us and welcome to Mackinsey Live. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Lucia. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you. Welcome. Kate and I are thrilled to be with you for this half hour. The situation is very fluid, and as Lucia said, we hope you and your loved ones are okay and going through this as well as we all can. We're firm believers that the digital recovery will be digital, and today Kate and I want to talk to you a little bit about the agenda, the digital agenda that companies are following to adjust to the current crisis and continue to accelerate. And so I want to start first by anchoring around the three big fundamental changes that we're seeing in the environment. First, of course, new customer behaviors and needs. All of us as consumers have had our share of online experiences in e-commerce. This is data on U.S. e-commerce penetration, 2019, 17% of purchases being done online. And during the crisis, data as of April, this has skyrocketed to 33%. Just to give you an anchor point, the forecast before the crisis were that we were going to reach 24% penetration by 2024. And so we already have jumped 5 years ahead in terms of digital e-commerce penetration. And while you could expect some pullback once the crisis is done, we actually don't expect pullback that will change the trajectory of this heavy trend. So we're 5 years ahead in our digital journey. The same could also be true on business to business side, and our data suggests similar progression. Second, the other big change in the environment is, frankly, this crisis has made the demand signal very unpredictable. There hasn't been a crisis like this in the past. And so we often try to look at markets that are a little bit ahead in terms of undergoing this crisis and this recovery. This is data from China. It's interesting data. We're looking basically at credit card transactions in stores. and a reference point of December 2019 at 100, the Chinese New Year, which always is a big consumption phase, and then the lockdown largely in February, and the beginning of the recovery in March. We have some data for May at 85%. And so we're seeing some kind of recovery, not quite to the historical levels, but the truth is if we were to unpack this number, we would find huge variation by regions in China, but across the world, we'd find huge variation by product and service categories. And so the truth is that it's pretty hard to run a business today without having a lock on the demand signal. And the last one, of course, something that we're all doing, we're even doing now, is this remote working model. And this is data from the U.S. on employees that are working fully remotely, so across different sectors, financial services, manufacturing, education, and health. And of course, the numbers are staggering. And we've all kind of experienced this in our own work life, but this is happening at a scale that's unprecedented. Very good.
Eric, can I interrupt you for a second? We've had a question come in on remote work in the manufacturing context. It's very easy to understand that big jump in financial services, but what accounts for that big jump in remote work in the manufacturing setting?
Yes, you would think, well, manufacturing, don't people need to be on the shop floor here to produce things? But the truth is, if you look at a large manufacturing company, you have people in the procurement department, you have people in product development, you have people in the sales organization, you have people in finance and HR, and of course, there are people on the factory floors. And that probably explains why these numbers are somewhat below financial services, but there's a whole bunch of white-collar jobs in a manufacturing environment where we're seeing the same effect as in financial services. All right, let me basically what we have seen across the board, and there's not a single sector where we haven't seen a stepped up digital agenda. It's been true in sectors like banking, as we just spoke about, but we have seen massive change in areas like grocery, medicine. The telehealth agenda is not front and center for any health providers and any health payers. Education, my first grade teacher daughter, who's now become fast a Zoom teacher, and so we're seeing many sectors that traditionally would not have been very, very far down on the adoption of digital channels being completely transformed. But also other sectors with huge field forces like insurance, agriculture, pharma, have all seen a transition as well to digital interactions with customers. And so we're seeing this across the board, and we'll tell you a little bit next how this is influencing the agenda of most companies.
Super. So look, why don't I pick up here, because I think as Eric's rightly said, what's really happened is we've vaulted about 5 years in terms of both consumer and business adoption of digital in probably just a matter of weeks. And almost whatever company you happen to be sat in today, you've had this massive overnight experiment in a huge surge around digital adoption and so on. And, while on one level, that's incredibly exciting and the rate of innovation, has been at a level we've not, certainly not seen in our lifetime. At the same time, as the economy starts to lurch back into whatever version of normal comes next, the challenge is, the demand picture is not going to be linear, right? It's going to be pretty unpredictable. It's going to be uneven across sectors, across geographies, across different consumer groups and so on. And against that backdrop, figuring out, well, what are the right things to do? How do I make sure that my company comes out of this, to use Lucia's term, stronger, not, thriving, not just surviving in this, becomes so critical. And so what we wanted to do today is really talk about, well, what can a roadmap look like for having the best darn shot that you can at paving your own path with digital, with technology, with data and so on. And what is it you'd need to do in a very pragmatic, practical way over the next 90 days to have your best shot at doing that as leaders? And in some ways, really embracing this great digital migration, if you like, as being not the end point, not the final thing, but actually only step one in the journey that we've seen so far. And what do you need to do next to get after it? So let me dive into number one first, because we're going to go through each of these four in turn and just offer a few thoughts and suggestions based on what we're seeing other companies do. Now, the first theme is really around refocusing for the customer, the changing customer expectations that Eric talked about just a minute ago. And really, wherever you're sat in your world, whether you're B2B or B2C, frankly, really anchoring on, well, how have your consumer needs changed? And I don't just mean how did they change, this week and it's going to spring back like an elastic band, but what are the sustained changes here? How can you figure out what were weak signals that just got accelerated through the crisis, and what is genuinely new behavior that you're going to have to create innovation to satisfy going forward? So if you can get an anchoring on the insights of how consumers have changed and how fast that has happened. The second then is, how can you be sure that you're going to move faster against those changes relative to your competitors? Because, this may mean needing to get to parity, for example, on your economic models. So, if I'm a grocery player, for example, I've had to surge massively, not just against vulnerable consumers, but consumers, more broadly, to make sure I can get the surge in demand or satisfy the surge in demand on grocery deliveries or even just click and collect. But I've probably done that at the expense of my economic model, because it was already a challenge around picking costs, around delivery, drop density, and so on. And what I've done is I've thrown people at the problem, labor at the problem. I've thrown, less effective, frankly, delivery routes and so on. So I've exacerbated a disparity in economics already. And now I've got to go back and figure out, okay, with this new level set of demand, how do I do that in a more profitable way than I even did when it was not such a big part of my business, right? And then thirdly, to do that, are you relaxing the constraints appropriately? So have you really challenged every part of the value chain to say, all bets are off now, right? Doesn't matter what industry you're in. You're able to challenge the sacred cows, if you like, in a way that we weren't able to 6 months ago. And that has spawned new business models, new channels, new opportunities to make money in different ways that didn't exist before. And so if you can keep anchored on those insights and think about the level of innovation that you're now able to unlock because all bets are off, that then becomes a very powerful set of things that you can do over that 90 days that allows you to sustainably unlock your ability to serve those changing customer needs in the way that is right for you. I'll give you one example here. There's a great variety store chain, let's call them, in Europe, so retailer in Europe, that went from zero, right, no e-commerce operation whatsoever, to being a fully functional e-commerce business in less than 3 months through this period. Now, in one layer, that's fairly easy. We can all stick a front end up and hope for the best. But this was not just a front end. This was a fully interconnected business across warehousing, across customer support, across merchandising, and so on. And it enabled them to increase the basket size relative to the stores by 3x and deliver 3% like-for-like sales boost at a time when, frankly, had they not had this in place, sales would almost have turned the tap off entirely. So it is possible if you're able to move fast against the changing customer demand. And as I say, thinking through what that demand is, how do I reduce the friction in the customer journey, the new customer journeys that people really want, and how do I use this surge in innovation, this surge in openness to relaxing the constraints to do something very, very different that could unlock the economics in a way that hasn't been possible to date. Let's move to number 2, because I'd love to dig into the data and analytics side of this and get, Eric, your views perhaps.
Very good. Thanks, Kate. One of the most difficult things that companies need to do now is, how do I run my operations with this level of uncertainty? And so we all know everybody's focused on the sales side right now, how to recover the lost sales due to not across all industries, but many industries. due to COVID. But it starts to ask questions of, okay, how many sales reps should I be deploying out there right now? What kind of sales leads are going to be productive sales leads? If you're trying to staff up a call center, how many people should be in a call center? If you're working with a branch network in banking, how many branches should be open? If you're managing a set of complex assets like an airline, which flights should be running? Which plants should be producing? How much should they be producing? And then if you're like a bank and receiving 30, 40, 50% incremental calls to your call centers, how do you start to deploy technology to handle the increased volume when you can't staff up to it? All of these are decisions that in a regular business environment, you have a bunch of decision support systems to make these decisions. Now, these decision support systems are out of whack. The underlying data to guide you in these decision making is no longer reliable. So what do? Can't make up the data. And so 2 or 3 techniques that are being done right now by our clients. One, get a grip on which models are out of whack. So validate the models that you think still perform well and those that are out of whack. For those that are out of whack, got to recenter around a set of data that's going to be more reliable. So typically it's about shortening the time series and lock in on a signal that's closest to what we're currently experimenting. And the second technique is to actually enrich the data set. So for example, should you be locking in on credit card transaction data at the store level, like I've shown earlier on the Chinese market? Should you be locking in on COVID cases by county if you're in the United States to try to enrich the decision-making performance of your current support models? And of course, some areas will require entirely new models. If you think about airlines and you've been parking 90% of your fleet somewhere in Arizona, how do you actually maintain these aircraft for readiness and to get back into business when it's time to go? Those will require a new set of models to actually help out with these decisions. And so there's an environment right now of being able to figure out which models are out of whack. You probably have already a good grip on this, but then how do you actually migrate them quickly to a place where you can continue to perform well in terms of your business decisions without having the luxury of a clear demand pattern? Now, I want to shift gear and cover a little bit what it means from a technology capability. Any company that wants to excel at digital needs to be good at 2 things. It needs to modernize its technology stack, and it needs to modernize how it delivers software. And when you do both of these things, the results can be spectacular. And this is an example from a run-of-the-mill Asian bank, frankly, that has really stepped up its investment in its technology stack and stepped up its investment in talent and its software deployment method. And you can see the results. When you leverage modern technologies, you can actually eat your cake and have your cake and eat it too. And in this case, on the right-hand side is a cadence release. So almost a 10x increase in the number of software releases that this bank is now able to do versus history. And in the past, we thought this was going to come at an increased IT cost, and that's been the reverse. Very high level of productivity allows you to do more for less, and this bank is a good example of that. And I think for all of us now going through this time period where we know the digital agenda is that much more important, how do we actually start to get the benefit of a modernized tech stack and modernized software delivery method so that we can do more with less? Do more with less, but in a shorter time frame than what's shown here. So how can we take a 4-year program and start to boil this down to 18 to 24 months? So let me maybe offer a couple of suggestions on the next page. A lot of companies need to now look at their IT cost structure and say, how do I free up some of the costs that are embedded in my cost structure in light of less demand. And so variabilizing the cost structure and looking at ways to actually extract some costs that you can reinvest in the following areas. Moving to hybrid architecture, basically being able to move to the cloud, new code, and your data environment so that you can really accelerate the speed of delivering digital solutions. Adopting modern software delivery processes, being able to release software daily, weekly basis versus quarterly and yearly basis. And that acceleration is critical to actually be able to keep the pace up in terms of software innovation and delivery for your customers. And then talent. Talent is probably the most difficult part of this. We know that moving to a hybrid architecture can be much more rapid. We know that automated software delivery can be fairly rapid now, certainly accelerated versus the example I gave you previously. Building the engineering talent remains the biggest roadblock. And this is where the time scales are hard to compress. And so this is one area where we advise our clients to really get on an agenda to build the engineering talent base that's going to be required to accelerate the digital agenda. Kate, back to you.
Super. And I can see there's some absolutely awesome questions coming through the Q&A as well. So I'm going to try and pick up a few of these as we go. It's the perils of only half an hour on this. So we'll see if we can connect offline as well with some of you. But the fourth element here is really about the organizational drumbeat. And, some of you have made some great comments in the chat around, Zoom, just adoption of Zoom or adoption of WebEx or whatever does not denote or is not evidence of adoption per se in the senior management team. And you're absolutely right. For me, this is much, much more and much deeper culturally than just, were we able to use a few digital tools because we had to, right? This is actually about how do you start to rewire the organization for speed, for the metabolic rate at which you can work at, as opposed to just, as I say, sort of adoption of a few cursory tools which may or may not, stand the test of time. And the reason I like this example, this is taken from the telco sector. We have a survey tool that we use for completely different purposes, by the way, called Agile 360. And it basically measures along the x-axis here the degree of agility of a company, right? And then on the y-axis here, we've taken the reaction time in launching some form of crisis-related new product or service in the sector. Now, this, for me at least, this is quite stunning linearity in terms of those companies that that are deemed more agile in the way that they work. Not just they have a bunch of teams sitting in a digital factory, but that the whole organization is able to work cross-functionally, that they've started to adopt, smaller teams working against agile principles across the whole organization. Those companies that were rewired for that have been able to move much faster against the new opportunities as they've come up in the crisis. And I saw the question from, and I apologize if I pronounce your name incorrectly, Remya, where you said, are digitally mature companies more able to handle the crisis better than others? Well, this data would say yes, right? And also, by the way, what we're seeing certainly coming out of Asia, if you take them at the sort of front end of the curve on this, those companies that were already rewired for digital before the crisis are coming out much stronger, much faster in terms of the recovery curve as well. Now, what does this actually mean? Like, how do I organize? How do I change the organizational drumbeat? I think there are just a couple of things that I keep in mind around this. The first is almost looking at your whole business and saying, well, where would, if you like, digital execution drumbeat or COVID speed, where would that make a real difference in terms of velocity? And how can your more digitally native teams that you've got within the business, how could they be set up to support that? Right? Whether that is re-looking at, all of the things that you've got on your plate and saying, if these ones would really benefit for it, how do we repivot the organization, towards using those resources in a better way? The second then is looking at remote work, and a number of you raised questions in the chat about remote work as well. Where can that benefit unleashing of productivity versus needing to be together as teams? And we're certainly finding, for the ability to bring expertise and to amplify that expertise over more places in a shorter time frame and so on. That is much easier to do remotely. Sometimes actually bringing together teams that had not worked across the organization before because they've been sat in silos, they've been, sat together and that was the way that they worked. Those types of teams are able to come together better under remote working conditions as well. And by the way, we certainly see that within Mackinsey. It's much easier to get some of our best experts to go and have, 15 meetings with clients in a day as opposed to be constrained by their physical location and where they can actually be. So there's certainly elements of that. And then I think, the third is then how do you crystallize the changes that you want to make there into what could be only termed as a new operating model for you. And what we're seeing a lot of clients ask is, how do I bottle what's really worked here? Because for many, while I'm not saying it's been easy by any stretch, this sort of overnight experiment in Agile has taught them that they could actually do things and work differently in terms of ways of working and so on, more so than they had dreamed. And you see lots of people who said, God, I've been trying to do Agile across the organization for years, and then suddenly we had to do it overnight. And that forcing of it, people are now looking to say, well, how do I bottle this? Because there are things that worked within this, and I want to be able to make sure that this doesn't just ping back to a new way of working. A number of you have also asked about upskilling and so on, and also within the B2B context in this frame. A lot of this is also about not just changing the way that the organization is wired, but you have to teach people new skills. Exactly to the gentleman that made the point around Zoom not being the marker of success here. It's absolutely right. You have to teach people how to use these new tools, these new techniques and so on, and how to work differently in order for that to stick. And what we're seeing come out of the sort of second part of this sprint is a real focus on learning and development and upskilling and reskilling of organizations. And I think that will be the big change that we're going to see over the next few months to really, really make this stick. So asking your HR organization, for example, what are we doing to learn now to make this stuff stick as a new normal starts to return? So let me just flip, because I know we're getting very short on time now. We've crystallized everything that Eric and I have touched on into one very simple page, I hope, against these different sprints. And someone asked, why 90 days? Honest answer, why not? It felt like a fast enough time frame, but a time frame that people can make real change happen. And what we're seeing and trying to get across here is that, if velocity is the new killer app, right? We used to talk about efficiency and effectiveness. We're now talking about velocity. If that's the case, if you can do this in 60 days, fantastic. If you can do it in 30 days, fantastic. But 90 days feels like the kind of behavioral change that is able to stick and gives you the time to actually make this a lasting difference. So really, as top teams, whatever organization you happen to sit in, this is about resetting your digital agenda to meet the new customer needs, to shore up the way that you make decisions across and within the organization, and to tune up the way that your organization works, and indeed the way your tech stack works, frankly, in order to operate at what we would now call, COVID speed, and that we think, is not going to go back to anything as slow as we saw pre-crisis. So we hope this has given you at least some thoughts and pragmatic suggestions that you can take away and poke and prod your teams on over the coming weeks and months. You've now got Eric and my contact details as well. We'd be delighted to have separate follow-up conversations with you. So please do just reach out and contact us. This is what we do. We're geekily excited about the topic and really keen to make change happen in whatever businesses you happen to come from. So thank you for your time today. Really, really appreciate it.
Kate and Eric, that was fantastic. We're at time. I'm going to ask you one last question just to close. Kate and Eric, you may have seen the question in the feed about how to proceed in the absence of massively accompanying supportive programs. In other words, if companies are so tied up with the immediate concerns of this crisis that they can't invest in these four imperatives simultaneously, where should they best focus their efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I have a view on this, and Eric can tell me if he disagrees, because that's much more fun. for me, you've got to do all four, right? I mean, that's the easy answer in this. But if you can only do one, if you can really focus on one thing here, for me, it's the organizational drumbeat. Because, working differently is the multiplier here across the others. And if you can get the organization rewired for working in a different way, it actually becomes easier to do the other three, right? So for me, if I had to pick, it would be number 4.
No, I will disagree with Kate. My pick would be number 1. And my pick would be number 1, not because I disagree with 4. Of course, 4 I think is a more potent midterm formula. But I think here and now the recovery of sales is critical. And so achieving parity versus competition on your digital channels, that would be my number 1 priority. So I would look at my digital channels to customer, I would benchmark versus competition, and if I'm not at parity, that's where I would double down.
Fantastic. Great, guys. We appreciate your time today, Eric and Kate, and on behalf of Mackinsey Live, we thank all of you in the audience for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we look forward to your feedback in a super quick 10-second survey that will appear when you close your event console. Please visit our website, McKinsey.com, for more insights into the digital-led recovery, agile, cybersecurity, and more. And be sure to register for next week's webinar on a vital topic, a little bit heartbreaking for Americans, protecting small businesses in the U.S. from the impact of COVID-19. See you there. Have a great day or evening. Be well.